Okay, this is the application that we created last time, and what it is, you double click on it and it asks for a number. I will type in number 5 for example, and the application will create a grid with 5 rows and 5 columns. You refresh it, type in a different number and 3 this time, so it will create a grid with 3 rows and 3 columns. You type in a different number, 7 this time, so 7 rows and 7 columns. So in this lesson we want to control it a bit more. We want to have the liberty of choosing the number of rows and number of columns the application creates. So I will close this, rather I'll sort of change the size of it, and this is the application, so I will right mouse click and open it with my text editor, which is Sublime Text. I will resize it, and we have our text editor and the browser side by side. So what we are doing here, we have created an element, table element, and this was described in last video, but I'll explain it one more time. So we have created an element table, and the name, the ID of this table is a square. Over here we are giving this style 1 pixel solid black, which will create an outline of 1 pixel. The width is 500 pixels and height is 500 pixels as well. In this piece of code we are saving this element document. We're targeting this element with the help of this method document.getElementById, and the ID of this element, table element, is a square. In this piece of code we are creating a prompt. So this prompt is created by this piece of code, and whatever number the user types in, that is saved in this variable called number, and as soon as the user types in a number, we want to run this function called render grid. And this is the function that we created by the name of render grid, and what it is running as many times, which is this number here. It is running as many times as the number that the user types in. So if the user types in 5 here, that number is saved here, and this number becomes 5 in this particular case, and this loop will run 5 times. Initial value of I is 0, and then every time this loop runs, we create an element, a HTML element, table row. This is where we are creating this element, and this is where saving this value, this thing, as a constant here, as a variable. Now there is another loop, and say our number was 5 for example, and this is a nested loop. Okay, and every time this loop runs, we create another element, which is table data cell, and we're saving this in this constant td. So every single time this loop runs, this loop will run 5 times in if the number that is typed in is 5. Okay, if the number typed in is 7, if this loop runs once, this loop will run 7 times. Okay, so that's how it is working. So we create a table row. Say for example our number was 5 here, so this loop will run 5 times, and every single time this loop runs, this loop will run 5 times as well. Okay, so one row will be created, but then if the number was 5, we will have this table data cell element created 5 times, and then once it has reached its limit, it will jump back to this loop. This loop will run second time, the value of I will become 1, and this loop will run again 5 times. And then once it has run 5 times, the loop will go back to this one, this value will become 2, this loop will run again 5 times. So this is how it is working. And in this piece of code, we are providing this style, CSS style, to this element that we created here, and we're giving a color of light green to this element that we created here. Then we are simply appending this element to this element over here, and then we are appending this element to this table with the help of this variable, this variable, which is targeting this element, this table element by ID. The ID of this element is a square, and you have seen this functioning. Okay, so if we want to control the number of rows and number of columns, we will have to change this a little bit more. So I'll copy this, and I will make a copy of this, Control C and Control V. So I will call this number of rows. Okay, and I will say enter the number of rows, and I will call this columns, enter the number of columns. Okay, so I'll pick this up, I'll copy this, and I'll replace this number by the number of rows, and I will change this variable. I'll replace this variable by number of columns. Okay, so the user will be prompted twice. If I save it, if I refresh it, enter the number of rows, I say number of rows 5, for example. Then there is a second prompt, enter the number of columns. I will say 3 columns, for example. So you have 3 columns and 5 rows. Refresh it, it will ask again the number of rows, maybe 7 rows, for example, and 2 columns. So it has 7 rows and 2 columns. Refresh it one more time, 10 rows and 5 columns. We have 10 rows and 5 columns here. Okay, so that's how you can control the number of rows and number of columns in this script. I hope you learned something today. I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you very much.